everybody knows a woman. And I think that's something that I am so passionate about is, this has nothing to do with me. It's always something to do with you because it will be affecting somebody around you.
Would I feel comfortable knocking on my coach's door to tell them I can't train today because I've got my period? No, probably not. And it's still getting to a point where that is normalised and spoken about.
Everyone needs to know more, but also we need to change the culture in sport, don't we? So it's more compassionate.
Hello, I'm Orla Chennaoui and I am delighted to welcome you to a conversation I've been super excited about and one we should all be having a lot more. Yes, we're here to talk periods and sport. And with me today, I'm so happy to be joined by long jump sensation Jazmin Sawyers, Lioness legend and Arsenal striker Jodie Taylor, and women's health and performance expert Dr. Emma Ross. Welcome to you all. Right, formal introductions out of the way. Let's chat. Let's dive deep, shall we? We're all here because we are women. We work in sport in some capacity, and we're all passionate about bringing this conversation more to the fore. Now, Jazz, to you, first of all, congratulations before we start on your European title. I absolutely loved seeing that. But you have been very vocal about periods throughout your career, really. Why is that? Why have you felt that it's been so important to talk about?
To me, it's one of those things that athletes talk and tell people when they're injured. If something to do with their body is affecting their performance, then that's a conversation that we have. And it came to a head in 2017 when I had to pull out of a competition due to my period. I get really bad period pains and it arrived unexpectedly. I was in so much pain, I had to pull out of the competition on the day a few hours before, and I felt like I wanted to explain to people who were expecting to see me jump why they weren't going to see me jump. And even though it wasn't really something that we were having the discussion about at the time, I thought, well, this is the truth. This is the reason that I'm not competing. And so I'm going to share that. One, because it's true, and two, because I realised that we're not talking about this. And I think if I'd started talking about this earlier in my career, maybe I'd have found a solution. I wouldn't be at a point where I'm having to pull out of international competitions. So really it was to try and have that conversation.
I want to get back to that in a moment, but just briefly, what was the reaction to that? Because that feels like a very brave thing to do, and I think even today, somebody coming out and saying that would feel exceptional.
It was a very mixed response. I had a lot of really, really positive feedback, people saying, wow, I feel like I can now have this conversation with my coach, or it's great to hear you talking about this because we don't normally talk about it. But I also got a lot of people going, well, my wife goes to work on her period.
Can I just say, though, my wife.
Yeah.
Speak for your wife rather than allow her to speak.
Yeah. I did have quite a few people saying, one, we don't want to hear about this, gross. And two, most women get on with it. Why can't you just get on with it? And that comes from a place of lack of understanding how different periods can be for each woman, and how for some people, you can go about your day, but for some it's debilitating. And so I was glad to have opened that conversation, at least for me. And now I'm happy that we're here talking about it, and that there are so many more women and men talking about periods. It's important.
Yeah, that's the key. Jodie, you are a Golden Boot winner, multiple caps for England. How has your period, your cycle, how has that affected your performance over the years?
Yeah, my period over the years has really affected me without really knowing. And it wasn't until gaining more knowledge and understanding of periods and different cycles did I realise how much it was impacting me. So mine was less about symptoms whilst on my period. It was the lead up into it, which really affected how hard I could train and my recovery and inflammation in my body. So a number of years ago, I had a really bad Achilles injury, and every time a certain time of the month, my Achilles really got agitated and irritated and kicked off, and I didn't know what it was until getting more understanding about my period, and it happened a week before my period.
Until you start paying attention, you don't realise that it's linked.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think we all look at the symptoms as well, like leading into game day. But the first day of my period, I get really bad cramps and I'm bloated, which affects how much I eat because I lose my appetite, I'm not hungry. So that obviously has a knock-on effect of my nutrition and recovery. But to say how brave it is for you to come out and speak about it, because I don't think I know anyone. I've had teammates who really are debilitated by the period, but will never, ever pull themselves out or say anything about it. They just suffer in silence.
Even now, even today?
Yeah. I think it's more spoken about. It's still taboo, and I think it's something that we all need to move beyond, and hopefully speaking about it today. And I've had other teammates who've come out in the media and speaking about it will help. But I think within a team environment, people are a bit more comfortable talking to medical and sports scientists about it. But I don't think it's at the level where people openly can say, I can't play today.
But I think what we've got in sport is this sport is all about being judged, like for your performance, and it's all about selection and whether you're going to make it onto the pitch. And so one of the things we have to get through is this fear that if I start talking about how I feel on my cycle, that I'm debilitated by pain, that's going to be used against me. And that's not where we need to get to. We need to get to a place of support in sport where someone says, oh, Jazz, you've got debilitating pain that's stopping you competing. What shall we do about that? Like they would do any other injury, niggle, nutrition intervention. But I think there is this kind of low-level fear that if I start sharing my cycle with you and you know it affects me as a coach, and then there's this big match at the weekend, what's stopping you benching
dropping me for the game?
So it's about a change in culture as well as a change in, like, everyone needs to know more, but also we need to change the culture in sport, don't we? So it's more compassionate to support people to be able to then not have these things hold them back.
I mean, you've had a lifetime in sport, really. You competed a lot in rugby, in triathlon, in Ironman, in marathon, and then you were saying before we started recording, then I had my kids, and that really is the ultimate in physical endurance.
That keeps me fit, yeah.
But your specialty, your expertise really is in research, isn't it? So tell us about the work that you do.
So I've been in sports science for my whole career. I did a PhD in exercise physiology, which is basically how the human body works, but how the human body works when we do sport. And for 10 years, I was a research scientist, so I really wanted to understand the human body and how we could push it to its full potential in order to support athletes like these guys, but also to make people healthier through exercise. And then I went and worked at the English Institute of Sport, which is the sort of science and medicine arm of the Olympic and Paralympic system. And it was in my time there that I started asking the question, do we support female athletes as well as we support male athletes?
What was the reaction to that?
Well, I think you can imagine people at the time. I joined the English Institute of Sport in 2012, which was just after London. I mean, everyone was like, Emma, did you see the Olympics and the Paralympics?
We put them on billboards.
Yeah,
That's
exactly. We're amazing, and we are brilliant at coaching athletes in this country. You know, case in point. But my question was slightly deeper than that, and it was, are you looking at this person in front of you, this athlete, as a female and understanding her female body as well as understanding her as an elite athlete? And no one could really genuinely say, yeah, I am. And that was hard for some people to admit because they're like, oh, gosh, I've forgotten quite a large part of what this human is made up of. So we just started a programme of education, of research, of innovation in the Olympic and Paralympic system to try and really educate coaches and athletes about their bodies. People assume you're born into a female body, you kind of know how to work it.
Without realising how many phases our body goes through, though. We get used to what our body is, then it changes into adolescence, and then it changes in our 20s and 30s. Then we hit, at whatever age, perimenopause, and then the menopause. And our bodies, our minds and our education is constantly trying to catch up with what our bodies are doing.
Exactly. So if women don't know about it, and you know, we do lack in education, not necessarily about, you know, the basics and the mechanics, but actually, you know, we talk about body literacy and we say, you know, understanding your body and how what your experience is of it, because all of us here will have a different experience of our menstrual cycle, for example. We'll have different symptoms. We might feel brilliant at different times. We might have niggles at different times. So understanding your own body and your experience of it is vital. And in sport, where your body is your tool and how you're thinking and your emotions are your tools, you know, the fact that we're not taking into account something like the menstrual cycle seemed a bit bonkers. And actually listening to Jazz and Jodie talk, you see how much periods in the menstrual cycle are integrated into them, their performance, their life, their health, their ability to perform. So we were ignoring it in sport. We weren't taking it into account. We weren't. Everyone wasn't understanding it very well. So my mission was kind of to, across the board, and not just with menstrual cycles, with all of women's bodies, try and get sport to understand them better, so that. And this is not about seeing them as fragile or weak. It's not about saying, oh, God, we get periods, and oh, God, we go through menopause. It's about saying, you know why it's a challenge for us at the moment? Because we don't understand it well enough, and because we don't have the strategies and tools so that Jazz doesn't get to a big competition and go, I still don't know how to cope with period pain. That's, that's because there is a lack of research, there's a lack of training, there's a lack of information. So that's kind of, that's the landscape we needed to change. And we've started, and people speaking out. I remember when I was starting that work, Jazz was one of the first athletes who talked openly about her story around her period. And I used that because lots of people in sport, exactly the same as you've recalled. Really, period pain? Like,
it's messy, it's ugly, people don't want to know.
Yeah, they go, oh, you're making an excuse.
Yeah.
You go, don't make an excuse, you want equal treatment with men, then stop making excuses like, your stomach hurts a bit, get on with it.
Yeah.
And it's such a lack of understanding.
Yeah, exactly. And if anything else was affecting an athlete in the way that someone's period pain might be, or someone's premenstrual anxiety might be, we're taking it really seriously, but because it's got period and menstrual cycle and sort of femaleness attached to it, it suddenly feels, not a space that people want to go. But actually, what a huge opportunity if we do understand it. Because if someone is losing 3-6 days a month of quality training or ability to train, and you can give that back to them, that's a performance gain. So we're not talking about, oh, this is the right thing to do. It is the right thing to do. But it's also going to impact the health and performance of athletes.
Do you know what I'm almost ashamed about even listening to you talking, Em? And I had this feeling as I read your amazing book, The Female Body Bible, which we have a copy of here, and it's genuinely incredible. Was there are so many things. I think I'm quite intelligent, I'm educated, I work in sport, and I have done for a long time. I'm self-aware, I'm aware of my own body. Even you saying premenstrual anxiety, I thought, I've never noticed. Of course that's the time of the month that my anxiety is worse. And when you talked about the different ways in which your cycle affects your training or your strength, mental and physical, it's something that we're still so unaware of. And if we're unaware of it at the professional, elite sporting level, Jodie, then of course we're going to be aware of it further down the chain. How much would you say awareness there is right now within professional football around the impact that our menstrual cycle has on performance, on training, and how much is that tailored into it all?
Yeah, not much.
No.
I think some clubs have progressed more with it than others. I think Chelsea Women FC are known to have been working with Orico and Dr. Georgie Broomvels, she's done a lot of great work with teams and sports. I think outside of that, not really. I had the privilege to work with her when I was with the national team in 2019, and that's where it was kind of a light bulb moment for me to really, again, identify, be educated on your period in different phases, for me to personally identify and I guess make sense of what my symptoms are, identify what they are, and then really listen to that. But it's really difficult to incorporate that into a team environment. We were chatting earlier, Jazz and I, about individual sports to team sports. So, I could know everything about that, but then how does that fit into a team schedule where you aren't really in charge of pulling yourself out of a session if you're not feeling great? And it's about the communication and a collaborative approach with the club, with the medical staff. It's so complex. But I think the bottom line is if you aren't educated, if you don't have the knowledge, understanding on, and can't identify it, then you need to be starting with that. So I think there's so much more that could be done. Like I said, I think some clubs are certainly incorporating it more than others. But yeah, there's so much more that needs to be done. Has
it changed much in professional football? You started your career in the early 2000s with Tranmere Rovers. Has it changed much in the 2 decades since then, would you say?
Well, the professionalism and the resources have, but I think only really the last few years have people really paid attention to menstrual cycle. And it's more so linked with injuries. I think, talk about ACL injuries that are so prevalent in the sport now, and people are looking at menstrual cycles and phases that you're in. So I think there's been more attention on it from an injury perspective, less about from a performance standpoint and how ultimately it can keep us on the field and performing through our menstrual cycles.
Jazz, have you seen much of a difference since 2017 when you pulled out of that Boston meet? I mean, I asked that question with the awareness that we are talking about it an awful lot more. And we've had Dina Asher-Smith, for example, linking her calf strain to menstrual cycle. Eilish McColgan has said we need to lose the taboo. We've had Michaela Schifrin talking about how her menstrual cycle has affected her incredible winter. So we are talking about it more. But is there a danger that we've got these big names giving us big headlines, but actually underneath all of that, we haven't improved our awareness enough?
I think the awareness is going up. For me, what seems to be the issue is research can't catch up quick enough to how much we seem to want to talk about it, or at least in my world where I'm kind of talking about it a lot. It's that there is some research, and you'd be able to tell me more about this, but it seems to be sort of conflicting and there's no clear answer. And so when governing bodies then come to their athletes and clubs and say, okay, this is how we want to be able to do something, the research isn't full enough to be able to say this is what to do. So you have to take it on a case-by-case individual basis, and that requires awareness at such a young age so that you are able to understand your body as you move and as you grow up. If I'd been tracking my cycle and being aware of how I feel every week compared to the previous month since I was a teenager, then I probably would be able to say, hey, I know that I'm going to feel worse in the week before my period. I know that my back's going to hurt. I know that my tendons are going to be more susceptible to injury because that's how I've personally experienced it. Then I'd be able to take that forward in my professional career. But unless there's an awareness at that lower level, people aren't taking that much notice. And until, research takes time. So we're not going to be able to say, and I don't think ever really definitively, this is what to do for every female athlete that you have, because you can't possibly do that. But without that awareness, the big names, it's important, but I think if you're a parent, if you're a coach, you need to be having these conversations with your kids and with your athletes to say, hey, how does your menstrual cycle affect the way that you feel? So that we can start that from a young age. And by the time you get to this level, you know your body so well that you can handle that yourself without external research.
That is a really important point when it comes to whether or not we'll have enough research ever to have a blanket piece of advice, because this is a complication when it comes to women, of course, Emma, and it's something that I almost think is used as an excuse these days, but in your book you're referencing the fact that only 6% of research in sports science is conducted exclusively on women. Now, of that 6%, only 8% is judged to be a good enough quality to be reliable. I'm rubbish at maths, but 8% of 6% is infinitesimal.
I love the fact that that's etched into your brain.
I'll never forget it. It just makes me so angry because angry is maybe the wrong word. Exasperated, frustrated, and searching for answers as to what we can do about that, because the issue that we have is, as subject material, we don't have a binary baseline, do we? We have the fluctuations, which makes research very difficult, and research is costly.
Research is costly. When you do it on women, you have to take into account the menstrual cycle, and that changes from week to week. In the male body, they have still have a hormonal rhythm. Everyone has hormones, everyone's hormonal. But in men, it's a 24-hour rhythm rather than a monthly rhythm. And that does mean that, gosh, we're going to have to either get all of these women at the same time of their cycle and test them on whatever research question we have, or we're going to have to test them at 4 times across the cycle to understand different phases. And as you say, that becomes time-consuming and costly, but that is not an excuse. We have in this country a brilliant reputation for research. We take on cancer and we don't go, oh, it's a bit complicated and costly. We won't go there. We just go, wow, it's complicated, it's costly, let's go after it. And I think, women's bodies have been excluded, and now is the time for it to be prioritised, to be funded appropriately. But I think, Jazz mentioned it there, the important thing is also the kind of knowing-doing gap. So we have enough information to be doing better. We do need to wait for really good quality research to keep coming, and there are some brilliant studies going on across this country. But also we need to make the most of what we have now, and we don't. And we don't make the most of knowing about how to reduce the risk of ACL injury in females. We don't utilise the information we do have about the menstrual cycle and get it into the hands of athletes so that they can, use it. And that comes down to coach education. That comes down to how much does that coach who's supporting these guys day in and day out know about women's bodies? And if they're a guy who hasn't had a lived experience, and if they're a guy who has previously worked in men's sport, who has gone through it, perhaps they've done a degree in sports science and they've done a qualification in coaching, they won't have been taught about women's bodies at any point of that journey. So it's actually, it's not some conspiracy that everyone we just won't do it. It's been overlooked, and now it continues to be overlooked. So we have to change that, but we have to get in at a coach education level. We have to get in at a federation level. So sports say, oh yeah, everyone in this sport, everyone in the women's game, everyone in women's sport needs to know more, needs to be better educated. The physios, the docs, the sports scientists, the coaches, the athletes. Let's raise the bar here on knowledge and awareness so that when we do get more research, we can use it. Because one of the biggest barriers to having these great conversations about, your experience of the menstrual cycle is your confidence as an athlete in the person's ability to receive that and not be mortified, embarrassed, to judge. And so if we had all of the research in the world and it landed in a space like that, where people aren't comfortable talking about it, it wouldn't matter. So the research wouldn't matter because it wouldn't be able to be utilised in this sporting environment. So again, we have to look at this holistically and say, fund more research, do brilliant quality research, but also make sure that the environment in sport is ready to receive it and already having open, comfortable conversations about women's bodies.
Yeah, because you talk about the cost of research, and that's a financial cost, but there is a performance cost of not paying attention to the research that we have, as you say. And in your team, Jodie, we've had 4 ACL injuries this season alone. And again, I'm guilty of not... I knew that ACL injuries are more prevalent in women. I know that concussion is more of a risk within women, but I hadn't actually linked that to our periods. Is that something that's becoming much more of a discussion now, given the prevalence of the injury within your team in this very one season?
It has. It's become, I think, in recent years, the last 5-6 years especially, talking about menstrual cycle with ACL specifically, ACL injuries, because there's a lot more ACL injuries in football now than there ever has been, and it's just getting worse and worse. And, I think it's so complex. I do think menstrual cycles are a huge part of it. I think it's load management, it's the amount of games that we're playing, and it all ties together. And I think hopefully the more research that comes out will help, because it is an issue. It is scary, I think you're seeing it, all your teammates around you dropping with their ACLs. It's it's not a great thing to see, but it's something that really needs to be addressed. That's from a FIFA level of competition scheduling, like the number of games that we're playing, lack of rest, lack of recovery, understanding of where you're at in the cycle of your period, being able to take the break when you need it. It's hard, it's the demands placed on footballers now is huge when we're not used to it. Yeah. So I think, the more research needs to be done. Hopefully, you can find the answers for us. Well,
I think when people are injured, they want... They're desperate for it to be something, and it's never one thing, right? Especially with a non-contact injury like an ACL, it's usually a perfect storm of a few factors kind of colliding in one moment, not physically, but metaphorically. And one of the things that I worry about is that if we kind of hang ACL injury on the menstrual cycle, we ignore all of the other really modifiable risk factors that we can change, like putting women in boots that are designed for women's feet, not giving them the poorer playing surfaces, like Jodie said, managing load, not having a training a whole season and then a summer of competition and then just running through, and not considering the recovery of the players, not conditioning them to move well enough. All of those things are risk factors. And yes, the menstrual cycle is another thing that women can add to their list of things that might affect their injury risk. And both Jazz and Jodie have spoken about their own experience of their bodies, niggles in the back, flared up Achilles. And that's what's so important here. It's what is your experience? Because we did some work across Women's Super League last year, and there were players who are really afraid of being injured if a game happens to fall on a certain day of their cycle. Not because it's what they feel, it's because of what they've heard. And funnily enough, fear of injury is a risk factor of injury itself. So we mustn't kind of put menstrual cycle to the top because we want something to blame, but we have to integrate it into this whole picture of the complex picture of injury, and for everyone to understand their own experience of their body at certain times of the cycle.
I guess injury is so much more complex, isn't it? So many factors. One thing that is good, we're seeing progress is in clothing, isn't it? So we've seen Wimbledon are switching from the obligation of all white, and so you can have dark undershorts. In football as well, at the World Cup, we'll see period-conscious dark shorts as well. Jazz, I'm really conscious of, in your sport, in your discipline, you wear such tight figure hugging, figure revealing, really, performance wear, and it's essentially a pair of pants. Have you ever been self-conscious when you're on your period and you're competing, and does that factor into the psychological approach to your performance in any way?
So first thing I'll say is that is a choice. The little ones, the little sort of briefs that I wear is a choice. There are longer shorts available. So just first of all, because I think some people worry that we have to wear the tiny briefs. There are bigger ones available, probably not long enough ones available, and there's been conversations about that, but that's for another day. Personally, because I always say that my period has FOMO, because your
period has FOMO.
Every single time I have a major championship, regardless of the time of the month, my period arrives. I want to be here. So I've gotten very used to competing on my period, and I've kind of gotten used to how to manage that and to not really worry about any leaks or anything. But I think people underestimate the kind of worry that that can cause, and how much of a performance impact just thinking about that can have on an athlete. And I think a lot of, as well as just changing so that women can be in darker clothing, a lot of brands are now doing period-proof training wear. So shorts and leggings and things. There's a lot of period pants available on the market. And so I think if you have a look now, things are getting better and better in terms of specifically made period wear for female athletes. And I think that's really on the up. That's something that I've been really pleased to see. The availability of things like that. Sportswear brands are collabing with period pant companies, and then sportswear brands themselves are making, for people that prefer not to wear underwear under their leggings or under their shorts, they're making sure that sport is accessible to people and to women all the way through their cycle. Occasionally it has been a worry for me, you know, often because I'll be competing and my period arrives, it's usually day one, you know, the heaviest day. But I've kind of just gotten used to that. So I've now got a formula. I know what I need to do. I know what I need to have on hand. I know what needs to be in my bag, ready. I know how many times I need to go to the loo and just get everything under control. But again, that comes from years of...
and that's what we would describe as like cycle resilience. So it's like, you know your cycle, you know what's going to happen, and you know what you need. And so you have all these habits now that, okay, oh, geez, it's arrived, it wasn't meant to, but okay, kick into these habits of what I do so that I feel great and I can go out and compete and jump brilliantly. And that's where we all need to get to as women, isn't it? So that we kind of can really navigate our cycle in such a positive way.
It's normalising. It's normalising the talk around it, because 50% of the global population lives with this for decades of their lives every single month. How welcome is it, would you say, Jodie, that we do have darker shorts now? You know, and the Lionesses will have darker shorts than the World Cup.
I'm very happy about it. I always seem to play for teams that have white shorts, and I hate it. I really hate it. But no, I think the awareness of it now and clubs and organisations are willing to make change is very pleasing. I hate white shorts. I'm really happy to get rid of them.
So we're talking about the very important changes to performance wear that enable us to perform more comfortably and, I guess, feeling better about ourselves. And Emma, there's one bit of research or one stat from Women in Sport that I find heartbreaking, really, and that's that 7 in 10 teenage girls won't exercise on their period, regardless of how sporty they are, because they're afraid of leakage, they're afraid of not understanding maybe their bodies correctly. And my worry about that, I don't know if there are follow-up statistics, but once you start discouraging, or once there's anything that discourages a teenage girl from continuing their sport, then it's a slippery slope to it dropping off. And we know how fundamental sport is to females for our body image, our sense of strength, our sense of self and confidence. And that's something that's really important, isn't it?
So important. And actually, by the end of puberty, 64% of girls will have stopped doing sport. And things like managing the changing body that's happening during puberty is a really big factor. And that stat about the fact that girls aren't doing sport when they're on their period, it is really sad, because it means that we're using our body as an excuse not to move. And actually our body is the thing that we should be celebrating, helps us move and experience the world that we can, you know, when we're doing sport. So I think one of the things I'm really keen on is we all know the scenario in school where someone would say, oh, I'm on my period, and the PE teacher would say, okay, fine, like go to the library or sit on the side.
La, 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 la.
Yeah, and actually, you know, some girls would have, you know, maybe 3 periods a month because they're like, they'll never check, and he won't ask any questions. Whereas actually what would be brilliant is if a girl says, I can't do sports today, I'm on my period, that the teacher says, oh, I'm really sorry about that. What is it today that's challenging? Yeah, but then what is it that's challenging you? Because, and then all the girls, when I'm telling the girls this, they're like, oh God, please don't make them ask me a question back. But actually, for one girl, it might be that she has heavy periods and she doesn't want to be away from the bathroom. For another girl, it might be she's in pain. For another girl, it might be she hasn't got to grips with tampons and she doesn't want to wear a pad with her short netball skirt. The reasons will be different. And if we don't start having conversations about what it is, we can't even help these girls because we're just going, oh gosh, girls don't exercise on their period. Okay. Well, we need to know more, and everyone's experience will be individual. So we do, again, unfortunately, need to get to that place where we're comfortable, whether it's, you know, a PE teacher or a coach, having that conversation and saying, what is it today that's challenging you, and what can we do to stop that being an issue in the future? And it might be, what period products could that girl use? It might be where we can train so that you're in a bathroom. It might be what can we do to alleviate the pain. But until we have those conversations, we don't know. But I think it is important to say, what is it you can do today? Because moving is always a good idea. And everyone here will know that that's not what they feel like if they're suffering from period pain. Even the most mild period pain, headache, lethargic, you don't want to move, but actually exercise releases endorphins. And they are a natural drug. They're a mood elevator, they're a painkiller, and usually moving is a really good idea. Now, it might not be that like high-speed HIIT session or trying to do your PB in the gym is what's on the cards, but moving in some way will really help alleviate symptoms of the cycle.
And I really just hope that conversations like this help because, as I said earlier, I'm almost ashamed by the lack of conversations that I've had around this even. And I spoke to Sophie Capewell, the track cyclist, about your campaign last year, Say Period. And we were talking during a Eurosport event, the Track Champions League, and we'd agreed between myself and Sophie she was going to come to me after one of the nights scheduled where she was supposed to be on her period. And she was going to come and we were going to talk about it live on air. Unfortunately, she dropped out with injury. But even having that discussion, I realised what a big deal that felt to me. I don't really have these conversations. And so I almost feel like if we find it uncomfortable as women, how can we expect men to feel that this is a normal conversation? And men are still the majority of coaches and experts within sport, Jazz.
You kind of need to keep saying it,
talking
about it, because, you know, for me to start with, it felt uncomfortable. And that's because from when I was very first taught about periods, I was taught that it was a shameful thing to talk about.
Hide it.
Separate the boys and girls. The boys can't hear about this. We have to do this separately. Now, this is something that we want to talk about amongst just us girls and make sure that, you know, the boys don't want to hear about this. That can't be the way that we're teaching everybody that we should be talking about periods, or we shouldn't be. That's the message that I think was driven into my head, at least as a young girl. And so that has taken some unlearning. So I think it is down to all of us to be having these kind of conversations in normal day-to-day life, because then it doesn't become this taboo, this scary thing, that we shouldn't really be having that discussion. It becomes a normal topic. And then, you know, when girls come to the teachers and say, hey, I'm not able to do it, they can very comfortably and easily say, okay, why? How can we help? What can we do about this? Otherwise, how do we improve it? If we're not, people say, oh, just talking about it, what can that really do? But I think that's the fundamentals of it, is just having the conversations with each other.
So that's what I wanted to ask you, Jodie. How much do these conversations matter? If we're going to the starting point of understanding and knowledge is talking about it, is conversation with men, with women. How much do these conversations matter?
Oh, the conversations are huge. Like Jazz said, it's about normalising it. It's gaining understanding, awareness, identifying it, and again, just normalising it. So it's not taboo, it's not awkward, it's not uncomfortable to be talking with teammates or coaches or staff or, you know, teenagers at school getting out of PE. It really is just about making it accepted. It's human nature, and we just need to get on with it, normalise it.
For anyone watching, then, listening to this conversation, what would you like their takeaway to be? How do we start to change this?
Biggest takeaway for me is just to normalise that periods exist. You know, they can be a pain in the arse. And, you know, we need to find ways for it to be comfortable, and, you know, the help and support and resources are out there for people in school at PE, for athletes such as myself and Jazz and everyone else out there. We just need to normalise it, talk about it, communicate, and it's a collaborative approach. You know, I think at club level, would I feel comfortable knocking on my coach's door telling them I can't train today because I've got my period? No, probably not. And it's still getting to a point where that is normalised and spoken about, male or female coach.
And you're performing at the very, very top level, and we want our girls to be able to knock on their PE teacher's door, and it's difficult for you.
Especially younger players coming through too. You know, you get older, more experience, you know your body a little bit more. But if you think about these young, talented players coming through, if we can normalise it, and for players to be getting educated and have the knowledge and the understanding, just normalise it.
Stop being embarrassed.
Exactly.
Jazz, where do you think this conversation needs to go next?
I think we really want, well, for me, I would like to see normal household conversations just happen around periods. If you've got a teenager, when's the last time you said the word period in your house? Whether you've got boys or girls. You know, you might be thinking, oh, I'm a mum with boys. What have I got to say? Well, you have periods. And everybody knows a woman. And I think that's something that I am so passionate about is, oh, this has nothing to do with me. It's always something to do with you, because it will be affecting somebody around you, somebody that you love, somebody that you care about. This will be affecting them in some way. So this conversation is for everybody. And I really feel as though just continuing to talk about it, feeling like in that moment, if it's you that's experiencing the period, in that moment where you think, oh, I shouldn't say that, push through it and just say it. Because if you start to make it normal amongst your group of friends, amongst your family, then somebody else then takes that on and it becomes a normal thing to talk about.
I think that's really important. I've got two kids, an 8-year-old girl and a 4-year-old boy, and I talk to them in very simple terms about periods. And I feel like we think children need to be shielded from this, but that's the age that for them everything is normal. They don't put any embarrassment onto it. That's an adult interpretation. So if we talk to them from a young age, when everything is strange and weird and curious and wonderful and bizarre, then they just absorb that information. Emma, what would you say is the fundamental next step with all of this? Is it research? Is it awareness? Where do we go?
I would really love to see an integration of education about women's bodies in all levels of sport, in coaching qualifications, in sports science, in physiotherapy degrees, because women are kind of excluded or we're given this kind of special population status in training, and we're not. We're either exclusively the people that these coaches are going to deal with, or at least half. So I'd love to see, and that will have to come from a top-down approach, kind of really integrating very important information about how women's bodies work into the professional qualifications and the coaching qualifications in sport.
Brilliant. Well, I can only hope this conversation starts a few more conversations outside of here and we have a bit of a ripple effect. Thank you all so much. Jodie, you've had record attendances so far this season. Amazing stuff. Best of luck with the summer. Jazz, good luck going to the outdoor season. You've got the World Championships in Budapest in August. Is that right?
That's right.
Good luck. We'll be cheering you on.
Thank you.
And Emma, congratulations with this book already. It is already a bestseller, Sunday Times bestseller, with Baz Moffat and Dr. Bella Smith. If you haven't picked this up, I would fully urge it. It is genuinely game-changing. I read it in one sitting and blown away by it. So best of luck with that. Thank you. Thank you all for coming. It's been brilliant.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. That was just so good, so good. Thank you so much.